Welcome to the Lifeline, a production of Simply BJE. The goal of this podcast is to build, inspire, and to empower our listeners through conversations on business, leadership, and mental health. We invite you to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and at www.simplybje.com/The Lifeline. Now, let's tune in for today's episode. Top of the day, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this episode of The Lifeline. We're your host, life strategist, and entrepreneur, Bo Powell, social media influencer and owner of the Furrier brand, Lindsberg Petway, and yours truly, leadership consultant and mental health advocate, Barry J. Elliott. You can visit us at www.simplybje.com/The Lifeline and on social media on Facebook, Instagram, and now YouTube. Today, we have special guest, husband, father, business expert, president of NameLock Incorporated, and public speaker, Mr. Stephen W. Coleman, who is now yes, sir, who is now a part of the Lifeline family. Glad to have you, man. How are you today?
Man, I am blessed and highly favored.
Welcome back.
So good to be back with you fellas.
Glad to have you, man.
I love the platform.
We
absolutely love
that.
the platform.
Thank you, man.
We appreciate that. Bo's not with us this morning. He's away being a father.
Bo is here.
I'm sorry, not Bo. Petway. I'm sorry. Lindsberg Petway. I'm sorry. Yeah, Petway is being a father, which is most appropriate. So we honor him as his son graduates from high school. So he's doing what he needs to do, and which is what is right to do. So we honor him in his absence. Absolutely. So let's dive into this conversation. Again, welcome back. The last time we were together, we continued our conversation offline, and sometimes some of our best conversations happen after we log off. But you talked about how you were unprepared financially when you got out of college. So tell our listeners a little bit about that story.
Well, when I graduated from college, one of the things, I do want to say this, and I don't want people to, today is different. This is 2025. So, I graduated from college a long time ago, 1996. And I was an athlete in college. And, a lot of times as an athlete, the only thing we think about is sports. We don't think about anything outside of sports. And so when I got out of school, I literally had no idea what direction I wanted my life to go in. It was kind of one of those situations where you've done something your whole life, and now all of a sudden, I was a track athlete in college. And now all of a sudden, you got to start thinking different. You got to start looking at the world different. And I honestly didn't have a plan. I didn't have a clue. Thank God for an amazing woman in my life who is now my wife. We were, dating in college back then. And she kind of gave me some direction. And I ended up going into criminal justice, which is what my schooling is in criminal justice. Worked in my field for 6 months and then went into the banking industry shortly after. And, look at God, that banking ended up, obviously transferring into a lot of different relationships and being able to put me in a situation that we're in today. But coming out of school, man, I had really no clue about what direction I wanted my life to go in. And because you don't have direction, obviously you get into a situation where you can have some financial challenges. Obviously, my parents, allowed me to come back home for a little while. And when I say a little while, I'm saying a few months. They would allow me to stay as long as I wanted. But, that was kind of my journey. And believe it or not, that's probably a lot of people's journey. When they get out of school, hitting those financial rough patches, trying to figure out life. We were up in the DMV area for my niece's graduation, high school graduation, last week. Matter of fact, this time last week. And I'm looking at all those 400 kids graduating and everyone's happy. And I'm like, wow. In the back of my mind, I'm like, if I could go back and if you only knew what was ahead. And so I think it's very important at early ages that we literally talk to our children. I don't think that there is a too early age to start talking to your children about finances, about, what do you want to do with your life? What direction? Giving them every single exposure and experience that you can to kind of prevent those things that happened to me to happen to them. And I had great parents, right, that guided me. But, you know, today is different than it was, 30 years ago. So, that's kind of my story on that. I don't think that it's too early to really start talking about money and purpose and position when you're coming up, so you can prevent some of those things.
I agree with that. There was a story, I believe I was in either high school or college, of a young man. His parents put him on punishment. And his punishment was, I think he was like 7 or 8. They made him go watch the stock market. By the time he was 10, he had a complete understanding of the stock market. And
Mm.
by the time he was 15, he was actually making money by investing.
And that's, we're all products of our environment, right?
Hmm.
The Bible says train up a child in the way that you want he or she to go. When they get older, they won't depart from it. And so I think it's all about training. The way we talk and view money has every single thing to do with how we were raised, what we heard. I'm not saying we can't change those things, but the way we were raised, how money was presented to us in our household has an effect on how we look at it. And I'm not even just money, just work, period. You know, okay. I didn't grow up in this type of household, but I'm making a point here. You have some households where, you'll have the parent, when the kid hits 14, 15 years old, they make the kid go get a job, right? Here's the problem. They make the kid go get a job, not for purpose and for experience, but solely for money. Okay.
True.
Here's the reason why that's detrimental long term. Because the kid then gets older, becomes an adult, and they work in places strictly for money, if that makes sense. They don't get an opportunity to really go pursue a purpose or go, in an area that because now, I just got to work. Well, I mean, what type of life? I get it. None of us can live without money, right? Not in today's United States. But I think that you know that can have a very twisted effect on a person's life when they become an adult, because they just think, oh well, I just have to get a job. I just have to get a job. I just have to get a job. But there is no real lesson behind it. Just you got to go get a job, And then, Lord, once again, situations are different, right? I didn't grow up in this type of situation, but I'm making a point. And then it becomes I have a job, but then I have to take care of the household with the money that I'm making as a 15-year-old or as a 16-year-old. Once again, those things can have those things as you become an adult normally turns into selfishness.
Yeah.
Financially turns into selfishness because you've had to give up every single thing you've ever had. Now that you're an adult, you're like, oh, I'm not giving anybody anything. I've been giving people stuff my whole life. You're not getting any money. And so we just have to be very careful of that.
Wow, that's powerful, man. And so, I believe that just like you're saying, some of our greatest areas are kind of born through struggles. We tend to go through things only if we perceive them right, get the lessons and stuff like that. And so, when you look at coming out of college and not being prepared like you wanted to, or I should say, experiencing some struggles like that, how do you feel like that shaped who you are today and
Um,
where you're going?
that is a great question. I think it gave me more insight. And when I say and when I say I had some struggles, these were more like internal things. Okay,
Mhm.
these were more like internal struggles during that time. Just self-worth, things like that. When you're trying to find yourself, you're trying to you think that life is something that you find out that it's not, and I think what it allowed me to do is to operate now in my life with a plan and a purpose. It's I don't ever want to be caught off guard anymore in any area of my life. And so I think what that time taught me was it just taught me that, if you're going to move, you got to learn how to move on purpose. You got to have a plan. So like when things happen, or I like if I'm in a situation now, I can dig back and say, oh, okay, Stephen, you need to prepare a little bit better. You need to start thinking, a few steps ahead so you won't have to be back in this situation. And unfortunately, when you're in one of these three states, when you are in either a bad mental space, a bad emotional space, or a bad financial space, it causes us to make bad decisions in all three of those areas. And that's when you get to this, we live in a crash out culture. Now people start to crash out. And so what I've learned is through the years not to crash out, because wherever I am and whatever is happening was planned, it was thought out. Now we're not talking about the nuances of life, but we're talking about those major things. It's like none of those things should ever catch you off guard. So those are kind of some of the lessons that it has taught me over the years. More so, there's an old saying: proper preparation prevents poor performance. Just being prepared, understanding, outcome, understanding that, things just, you can't allow life to just happen to you. You have to allow life to happen for you. And you have to use every single thing that happens as a lesson. It's either gonna be a loss or a lesson. And it all depends on how you look at it. And so those are some of the things that it kind of navigated me through those things and where I am now.
That's good. Let's backtrack for a moment because you talk about your parents and they were good parents and how, they prepared you for life. But one area they didn't prepare you for was finances per se.
Mm-hmm.
So how did that lack of instruction about money from your father motivate you as a father to change that narrative?
Okay. So it's not that they didn't educate. Okay. It's kind of one thing. And some of us are probably in this, some of you, we're probably in the same situation. It's not that we didn't talk about money. We weren't educated on money, if that makes sense. We had conversations about money, and I had positive conversations about money, right? You know, but it was more so just the nuance. Okay, so here it is. It's like growing up, my parents would always say, you need to save money, which is a true statement. Here's the problem. They never told me where. Is that making sense?
Perfect sense.
My parents said, oh, well, you need to do these things responsibly. Don't live above your means, but they never showed me how to budget. You got me? And so it's not that I didn't have conversations. They just weren't pointed conversations. But then let's be honest, okay? Let's be honest. Look, my parents were born in the 50s. They themselves, even though they had great careers and all of that stuff growing up, my mom was a stay-at-home mom until I was a freshman in college, right? But my point is, they were limited to what they had access to. And so I think that, like, the real story in that is, yeah, our generation was limited because our parents' generation was limited. But here's the problem. What are we teaching our children? Because now we have access to it all. And so once again, now those conversations, I mean, I can just think about conversations. My daughter has an IRA. She's a teenager. Our daughter has an IRA. She understands money. She saves money every single month. She's an athlete in college, and she gets her little stipend. And, we make sure, like, we don't even have to tell her anymore. She knows, oh, I'm putting 10% goes to the church, and then I save this money. I can remember she gets paid normally like on the first of every month, and I want to say it was a couple of weeks ago. She got a little bump up in pay, and she didn't realize it. And she was like, I don't need all of this money. Now, I want you to think about that for a second. We're talking about a teenager. She's 19 in college. And she's like, I don't need all this money. Mom, can you move some money to my savings account? And then my wife was like, you know what? Tell you what, here's what we'll do. Literally, we're on FaceTime. My wife goes, here's what we'll do. I'll move this much to your savings and we'll put the other in your IRA. And she was like, oh, yeah, that sounds good. Yeah, do that. But once again, why does she think that way? Well, it's the experience that she's had and the conversations that we've had and taught her about money. And I can remember when she was growing up, she used to always say, well, she's still growing up, but she would always say things like, Dad, everything doesn't have to be a lesson. And now she's at the age where she's like, Dad, I understand the lesson. I understand what you meant when you said this, this, this. And so, it's just training up a child. And, those things that my parents, not on purpose, didn't teach me, I'm able now to teach my kid.
I love it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's awesome, man. And I was going to ask you this, but you actually kind of almost answered it completely. Because I was going to ask about how you've changed the narrative, how you feel like your children have benefited from it.
Mm-hmm.
And I knew you would probably talk about the financial part, but you also touched on the mentality
Mm-hmm.
um, that it's shaped. And I think that's in a lot of ways why it's important to have those pointed conversations because it helps to develop the mentality to be able to think through and stuff like that. So, um, how important is it, like you said, and this is just kind of delving deeper into your answer is for us parents today to get out there, find the information, and really sit down. I mean, how do you incorporate that in such a busy world that we live in right now?
I think that okay, so this goes back to um I, I don't want to say philosophy, sort of say
Mhm.
when raising children. But oh man, this is gonna get deep. You know, the culture that we live in today, I just believe that parents, some parents, are not necessarily parents. They're more like providers, which is different. You know what I mean? Like they're not necessarily parents, they're providers. So there is no time, if that makes sense. So you have to make time because it's important. And so, like, when Brooke was growing up, I know one of the things that I always tell the story, and it's very important. Building, while I was building the agency, I was gone a lot. Those first probably 3 to 5 years of my daughter's life, I was gone a lot. Meaning there would be times I would leave and she would sleep and I'd come back and she would sleep. And I'd play with her for a few hours and talk to her and go to church. And then I'm back at it again 6, 7 days a week. And I can remember feeling guilty because I didn't have necessarily that time. But then I realized that the older that she got, she was going to need me more at 12 than she needed me at 3. And so once I realized that, I started working towards that goal. When she gets about 6, 7 years old, I want to be done and I'm going to be a completely present father. not just present physically, but present mentally and emotionally. And so through those years, being able to like, look, I'm taking you to school, right? Or I'm picking you up from school. And I used to always make sure that when we're on our drive to and from school, it was a 25-minute ride. There was always conversation. How you doing? And once again, that's when we had those conversations when she would say, oh, Dad, everything doesn't have to be a lesson. You got me? And so being able to talk through, financial things. This is what this is. This is what this means. This is how this works. And of course, kids, they're not interested in most of this stuff. I'm talking about early on, 10, 11, 12 years old. But you still have to continue the conversation because one day what you're going to realize is they were actually listening. And so I just believe that as a parent, you have to find ways to really talk to your children and invest the real time into them to give them what it is that they need to prepare for this big, bad world. And the world doesn't necessarily have to be bad, but your kid is going to learn lessons that they could have learned that you could have taught them if you'd have just spent the time to do it. People like growing up, when I got home, once again, my upbringing was a little different. Like I said, my mom was stay-at-home mom, right? Like we would eat dinner together every night at the dinner table, at least 4 days a week, 5, right? Well, we're having those conversations. We're not having those financial conversations, but I'm just saying we're at the dinner table around each other talking. We don't necessarily have that. One family, mom cooked today, and the kid like, I don't want that. I'm a Uber Eats Chipotle, right? And then the kid is in the room playing the video game while the mom is watching, while the mom is watching her show, and the dad watching the game in his man cave. Like, there is no cohesiveness where the family is together and they can have those talks. They can do it, but it has to be conscious.
Right. Yeah, as you were talking about, that's what I was thinking about. Um, when it comes to these type of things, it requires intention and focus.
Mm-hmm.
What is your intention for your kids? And are you going to maintain a focus to see that through? Because these conversations happened over years. I mean, this is wasn't one off. I mean, this was a pattern. This was the culture, from what it sounds like to me. So, and because I know you and Phoenicia, I know the type of people you are, how important is it for parents to create that culture and environment? Because I think our society is so kind of, quick, hit it quick, get it fast and stuff like that. But success takes time,
Mm-hmm.
And you can't like give your kid a lesson one day. But I'm sure, and this is a long question, but I know you're tracking me, but I'm sure, that these were intentional conversations that just spanned over years and months for that lesson to become a part of who they are. So kind of speak to how important it is to create a culture conversation. That's what it sounds like it was, an intentional, deliberate focus. Okay, this is where we want our kids to be, and we're going to pattern how we approach life and family.
Well, here's the reality, and I think I said this earlier. Man, we're all products of our environment.
Right.
I want to open up for a minute and I want to tell a quick story because it's an active story right now. I have a little cousin who's 18 years old who just about a week or so ago, going on 2 weeks, was arrested for capital murder, first degree battery. Okay. Unfortunately, it's not a surprise. Unfortunately, okay, it's not a surprise. It was environment. And I say that because most children, no, all of us, myself, each one of you, we're all products for the most part of our environment. And what we wanted to do with our child is create an environment where she could be successful in life. That we made sure that we showed her, you know, the right work ethic and having integrity and believing in God and, you know, praying, going to church and spending family time and, you know, all of those things. You know, one of the things that's important ever since she was like 3 years old, my kid, once again, she's 19, she just finished her sophomore year in college. And she's a music fanatic, right? Talking about environment. If you were to pull up a playlist right now, if you was listening to whatever she's listening to, 80% of it is 80s and 90s music. By 80%, 80s and 90s music. She sends me songs and I'm like, how do you know about that song? Right? But watch this. I'm giving this example on environment. Every Friday night, that was our family time. And every Friday night, from the time she was born to the time she graduated from high school, every Friday night, we would sit down, play 80s and 90s music on a playlist or television or whatever. And we would order either Wingstop or eat pizza. And all we would do is sit there and listen to old school music.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's all we would do.
Wow.
And right now, she'll be home this Saturday for a few weeks for summer break. She goes, when we get home, you know, I want you to do this for my friend. He likes music too. Like, do like we did on Friday nights. Do it like that. But why does she think like that? Because of the environment that she's in. So watch this. We influence, not even realizing it, we influence how she views music. That wasn't the intent. Okay. How many of us, our children have picked up certain habits from us that were unintentional, but they weren't necessarily good habits? You got me? We just sitting around like, oh, she young. We just gonna play some music. We're gonna sit down, we're gonna talk, we're gonna play, we'll play some games. And the whole time music is playing. And as she's growing up, she's like, oh, that's my song. And then we driving down the street and she in the back seat singing Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. I'm turning around like, how do you know that song?
Wow.
It's all environment. With my little cousin, environment. He did what he was raised around. Didn't have to, but the environment and the culture in our lives can get so deep rooted that you can't, it's destiny. Like you can't even do anything other than like it's destined for you to like, this is your direction. Like you're on this path. God can change your path.
Absolutely.
But you got to know him. And if you don't know him, I mean, it doesn't matter, but it's all environment. And I think that that's how you create culture. Culture is created through environment, which is, you know, it's manifested through words, then actions, and then it's remanifested and it keeps going and going and going. But some of those things can be unintentional. You know, some lessons we learned just not really understanding that it was a lesson. And so that was our plan for our child, is just create a harmonious environment for her and always let her know that you can do anything you want to do. You can be successful. You can, I mean, these are things, and just show her an example. And, you know, she's a good, oh man, love my kid, you know, and I love the young lady that she is growing up to be. But I say it all the time. she's like a mini, she's like not a mini me. She's a mini Phoenicia. She's like my wife. You know what I mean? Like she has my temperament and she has her mom's, her mom's traits, my temperament, but she's just a product of us. We were the examples for her. And when you see these kids wilding out, you got to know it's not the kid. It's the environment that they're in. It's the culture that they're in. And so, that was our intent. Just creating a positive culture for her, a culture where she felt loved, where she felt supported. And once again, I mean, it's not a surprise that she's the type of child that she is. It's not a surprise. And anyone who's been around our family, they would know, like, oh yeah, she was supposed, like, oh yeah. She's supposed to do that because that's how she was raised, if that makes sense. And so everything is environment.
I know Bo's about to close us out, but you just gave me something. I'm going to steal it. I'll give you credit though, because I believe in citing people.
Oh, without
my undergrad is in English, so we were strict about citations. But culture, actually, environment creates culture, and culture creates destiny. That's what I got out of that. So I'll give you a credit, but it's mine now, buddy.
It's all good. It's all good. Look, you added the destiny part, so right. You get writer's credit. You got what I mean? You get writer's credit. In the music world, we get writer's credit for that. We sharing points.
Yeah, that was funny. That was profound. But really, yeah, environment shapes culture, culture shapes destiny. That's profound. I got it.
These kids, man, they like we all. It's I don't know. It's the world that we live in is just different. And for our children, like I said, the way we were raised, if a person is 40 years old or older, they understand. Okay, they understand. But if you're probably, if a person is in their 20s, early 30s, there's really no excuse. And the problem is the way they were raised is exposed. The way we were all raised is exposed, but the difference between us 40 plus, most of us, we were raised with a level of respect.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? And here's the thing, I want to say this because I know we closing out. We were raised with a level of respect.
And even accountability.
Say that again?
And accountability.
Yes, and accountability. So even if you were, you could be the gangster of all gangsters, but you knew, man, I'm not finna be cussing around these elderly people, right? This person might have just shot at some guys around the corner and then get around these elderly people and open the door. You know what I mean? Because you just knew. I know that sounds weird, but you just do. Here's the problem. And we also, before I make that point, we also understood we would listen. Okay. Didn't mean we would take the advice, but we would at least listen. The problem with today's generation is a lot of, I'm not gonna say a lot of them because that now I'm casting of quite a few. They don't respect their elders. They don't listen, and they have absolutely, no respect for anybody other than themselves. It's just, that's just kind of what it is. And so here's the problem with that. The problem with that is you have to catch that early.
Yes, sir.
So for all my people listening to this podcast, you better start early, because by the time your kid gets about 8 years old and you let it slide, they're like this. Yeah. They don't even want to listen. And the older that they get, the less they listen. Because now they're being raised by social media. They're being raised by the phone and what people say. And then either you're going to condone it and say, oh, well, that's just him or that's just her. or you're going to do a real job in taking some time away from the phone, away from the television, away from this world, and really sit down and have real hard love conversations and time with your child. And you can change the direction of their life. But if you don't, by the time they get 15, 16, 17, they are who they are. And unfortunately, every lesson they're going to learn from here moving forward is going to be from the school of hard knocks. It's not going to be old school wisdom. It's going to be from the school of hard knocks. And that's a different tuition.
It is. You know, when you were talking, that was what I was thinking about when you were speaking about creating that culture.
Mm-hmm.
But it was built on purpose and principles, right? You know, which you just, explained with that. And so what that told me is that you guys were looking to create a holistic person, a whole person. Now it's just about, hey, get that bag. It's all about you, stuff like that. And hey, like you said, money's extremely important. I mean, try living without it. You know, it's like oxygen, as Zeke would say. But it's more to life than that. And usually what we want money for is to get things that are really, really important. Freedom, time with your family. I think that's the other side of it. Not just money, but time and purpose and intentional conversations with the people you love. So thanks, man, for being not just an example privately, but being able to share that story, publicly, with our listeners, to say that it is possible, even in the world that we live in today, to raise purposeful, principled children, and be purpose, principled people. You don't have to go with culture. So I appreciate our conversation went that way, because I think some listeners really need to hear that there is somebody living, but that was intentional. That was an intent thing that you did. You said, hey, I knew she would need me at 12 more than she needed me at 3. So let me be strategic and put the work in to create space for that, man. So thank you so much. So before we close out, Steve, we always like to let our listeners know how they can connect with our guests. So tell our listeners how they can find you on social media. Tell them about your business, how they can connect with what you do. This is your time to shout out, man, and get people to access to Stephen Coleman and the Ink.
Well, I appreciate that. Once again, man, I just feel like I am I feel like, man, I need to be on here. You know what I mean? Like y'all need to add a slot for me. You know what I mean? And I think that is extremely important. But once again, man, thank y'all so much for allowing me the opportunity to share. I can be reached once again, 877 262-7903. That's my 800 number. Instagram page. Obviously, I'm going through some remodeling and rebranding, not rebranding, but more so remodeling on that page. But you can reach me at the.inc.agency. You can reach me there as well. And so once again, man, I appreciate you guys. Anytime y'all call me, I am absolutely there, man. I love these conversations. They're impactful for me, because I get an opportunity to think about things I hadn't thought about like that, intentionally, that you kind of think through, but it wasn't an intentional thought. And so I appreciate and I pray that your listeners, that they can glean something from this, and that they can use in their everyday life. And so once again, man, I appreciate y'all.
Absolutely.
You,
Now,
you.
Steve, you also mentioned, your agency finance. So if people wanted to connect with you directly to find out more information about how they can, better themselves financially or get the wisdom so they can start teaching their children, how can they connect with your business?
Same way on
Okay.
that
I
800
didn't know if you had a number. Okay, you did give the 800 number. I missed it, man.
Yeah.
I was,
That 800.
in our conversation. Okay, good deal. All right, well, to our listeners, man. Anyway, this concludes another episode of The Lifeline with your hosts, BJE, Lensburg Petway, and Bo Powell. Don't forget to check us out at www.simplybje.com/The Lifeline. And you can find us on social media. We're on a mission. We want to bring light and life into your household. So join us and let us hear your feedback, because it's all about bringing life to you on The Lifeline. Y'all take care.
Thank you for listening to today's episode with host, business expert, and life coach Bo Powell, social media influencer and entrepreneur Lindsberg Petway, and leadership coach and mental health advocate Barry J. Elliott. Join us next week for another impactful conversation on the Lifeline. God bless.